What do you think's the root of the assortative mating increase?
I think a lot of it just is familiarity. I mean, people tend to date and marry people who we come in contact with. And I think, 30, 40 years ago, I think there were more, like the communities we lived in were more mixed when it came to socioeconomics. And you might go to a church or a social club with people of more varied backgrounds. But I think because of kind of some of the social stratification we've seen because of economic changes, I feel like I could be wrong about this, but my answer, my theory on your question is that university grads and non-university grads don't rub elbows in the same way they once did 30, 40 years ago. And I think that's kind of the root cause of it. But I mean, a big theme of both Datanomics and my new book, Make Your Move, is encouraging people to get past this and to be open-minded about dating people, with different educational backgrounds, because I think that's the key to solving this problem.
With the sex ratio hypothesis, and I've read a bunch of different studies, including I think the original seminal one that was done on it, is a hell of an effect. You see really, really bizarre changes in the way that people respond to their local ecology. So there's this sentence in the study where it says, it's almost as if human mating strategy responds to its local ecology, like a plant or something, right? That you adapt the way that you go about finding and refining your potential partner pool based on the relative number of men and women and what your sex is as well. So if you are a guy and you have a surplus of other men, you have to play the game, so to speak, that women want, which tends to be more dates before first sex. It means that you end up with less casual sex, you have higher rates of virginity, blah, blah, blah. Reverse that, when you have a surplus of women and a scarcity of men, you have more casual sex, you have fewer dates before sex. And I think you have an increase in sexual violence as well when you have a scarcity of men and an increase of women. But the bottom line is that it's a very strange impact across both.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of the sexual violence, one of the things I discovered when researching the first book, Datanomics, was I spent some time looking at trends in China, where you kind of see the opposite, where because of the one child policy in China, you have a group of marriage age people where the overall population is more male than female. And what's interesting is that as the youth population skewed more and more male, various levels of criminality increased. Burglary, murder, things like that. The only category of major crime that declined as the population became more male was sexual assault. And the theory the theory put forth by the author of this study was, it's kind of crass, but she argued that as when women are more scarce, men value them more and are more protective of them.
Even if they're not in a relationship or don't think that they have a chance at being in a relationship with them.
Yeah, I think this is more of a when in Rome thing than people making conscious decisions about how to behave based on a head count. I just think that the culture, as you alluded to, the culture changes depending upon these prevailing sex ratios. And what's interesting is that most of the sex ratio research that you alluded to that has been, come out over the past 20, 30, 40 years, it kind of evolved from research on other species. And in other mammals, other primates, you see similar things, that when you have imbalances in the sex ratio among the mating population, you get the same sort of behavioral changes that we've observed when it comes to human mating and human dating.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about the China study there is the increase in antisocial behavior and violent and non-violent crimes amongst men, because this is something else that you learn as soon as a man gets into a relationship. His testosterone drops, And then when a man has children, his testosterone drops again. Why? Well, it's because if you are potentially going to father a child, or you're now the father of a child, going out and doing something reckless or getting into a fight, you don't need to do that anymore. It's way, way, way too much of a risk. So it's much smarter for you to downregulate that testosterone, to be a more careful parent, to not get angry at the fact that your child won't stop crying or whatever it might be. But this is one of the dangerous things. You know, these imbalances in the sexual marketplace are leading to an underclass of sexless men, which can create quite a dangerous foundation for you to then sit society on top of.
I agree with everything you said, but what's for me extra interesting about this is this what you just described about putting men into competitive situations and suddenly their testosterone levels rise and you get more antisocial behavior. It's actually not just men. That when you put women into competitive situations, their testosterone levels rise too. And if you read Hannah Rosen's book, The End of Men, she has a whole section all about rising criminality rates among women and how putting women into increasingly competitive situations has led to a rise in female criminality.
No way.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So a lot of these things that we like to say, you know, it's a guy thing or a girl thing. It's actually a human thing, and I'm always trying to kind of pull it back to say, you know what, this is about us as humans, not necessarily about you as a woman, me as a man, etc.
Do cities make this worse then? Did you find that the research coming out of cities further amplified these problems?
I mean, I thought that was going to be the case because I've lived in New York City for a long time and I've heard my female friends have all these dating horror stories, but I'm not sure it's actually true. I mean, the imbalance, at least in the U.S., is actually greater in rural states like West Virginia than it is in Manhattan. So and I've interviewed also, lots of matchmakers in less populous parts of the country, where they've told me stories that sound very similar to what I've heard from people in New York City. So I assumed I assumed that the city situation would be worse. I'm just not sure it actually is.